Before we get started, we'd like to thank EMC Bond for sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety. EMC Bond prioritizes personalized service in every aspect of their business. When you partner with them, you'll receive stable, responsive, and timely solutions rooted in strong relationships. To learn more about EMC Bond, their products, services, and personalized approach, visit emcinsurance.com/bond. Now, on to our show.
You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of Let's Get Surety. I've got with me today my co-host, Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Kat. We got a hot topic today.
We're going to get into BEAD.
Yeah, pretty important. We're not talking glass beads either.
Not glass beads today.
Yep.
I'm excited about the big panel of guests we got with us today for this. So first, we've got Larry LeClair. He's the Director of Government Relations at NASBP. Hey, Larry, thanks for being back on.
Good afternoon, Kat. Thanks for having me.
Well, and we've got another repeat guest with us here as well today. We've got Philip Macres, Principal with Klein Law Group. Thanks for being on with us, Philip.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to sharing everything, or what I can't share on BEAD, what I know.
Well, we are glad to have you back on with us again. It was great having you on last time. We've also got Cory Sanderson. He's Home Office Underwriting Manager, Commercial Surety East with the Hartford. Hey, Cory, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having us. Excited to be here.
And last but definitely not least, we've got Joe Henson, Program Division with Widelity. Hey, Joe.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, before we dive into talking about BEAD, I'd like to learn a little more about you guys. Philip, can you tell me about yourself and about how you got into BEAD?
So I'm an attorney in DC. I've been practicing for a long time, over 20 years, 25 years here in DC, and represent telecommunications providers. I've been doing a lot of helping a lot of the ISPs these days with their grant programs, whether it had been from starting with RDOF, which was in front of the FCC, ARPA with capital projects, state and local fiscal recovery funds, then Reconnect, which is another funding program. These are all funding programs, and been helping them, whether it be through the application process, the compliance process, the legal issues, and helping them navigate through the issues that they're confronted with relative to these programs, because it's just not an easy path forward all the time, and you have to be able to just deal with the maneuvers. So
right.
So some of the folks that I've represented are Coalition of RDOF winners, represented folks in getting the actual letter of credit waiver so we can get the actual performance bonds for under the BEAD program. So
that's great. Thanks. So Cory, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Hartford?
Yeah, I've been with the Hartford for almost 2 years. I've been in commercial surety for just over 10. I was at Travelers previously, commercial surety the whole entire time. And I've been involved with BEAD as soon as that letter of credit waiver came out. And so I started getting myself familiar with the industry and the requirements and the work being done. And now we're here.
Joe, you want to tell me about yourself and Widelity?
Sure, yeah. So I've been with Widelity for about 1.5 years now, and Widelity is a consulting firm. We've been involved with the telecom industry going back to REPAC, the Broadcast TV Initiative, the FCC's Rip and Replace program, going on to many of the same programs that Phil mentioned, just helping clients through the application, reimbursement requests, and all of the compliance fun stuff that you have to deal with.
That's terrific. So I feel like a good place to start. I mean, Phil, can you just tell what is BEAD?
So BEAD is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Act. It's a program that was instituted and signed into law under the Infrastructure and Employment Act and Jobs Act 2021, IIJA. That was signed into law in November of 2021. And then they came out with a program which is overseen by NTIA. And that program is just under the Department of Commerce. And so they released a NOFO in May of 2022, which identified the program and how they were going to spend the $42.5 billion. Now, that's $42.5 billion designed to provide broadband services to unserved and underserved areas of the country. These are primarily rural areas, farmhouses, way out there in the sticks, and we're making sure that they have high-speed broadband services. So that's the program. It's, again, managed by NTIA, but they work with state broadband offices, and the state broadband offices have their programs, and they each individually handle the program and how the money is doled out within each state.
You know, I keep wondering if maybe the pandemic kind of emphasized the need to get broadband in those rural areas. I know there are other broadband programs, other federal agencies, but the performance bond or bonding in general really hasn't been a component of that. What's changed? You mentioned something about a waiver.
Right. So the NTIA program had two programs. There was an actual middle mile program, and then they had this BEAD program, which was just to provide service to unserved and underserved locations. The middle mile program had a 30% match and a 25% letter of credit requirement. And some of the client that I represented, we said we wanted to participate, but we said this is ridiculous. We're looking at the program and saying that's a heavy load to show the 25% match up front and also having a letter of credit. Because a letter of credit, you have to have cash collateralized. It's money in the bank, just like the match. They have to put a spotlight on it. And so we raised the issue with NTIA saying it's really a gating item for smaller companies and large companies relative to the letter of credit, because you have to have the money in the bank. It's cash collateralized. Not only is it cash collateralized, you pay about 2% on that letter of credit. Maybe you have more favorable terms if you're a bigger company, but at the same point in time, you're exhausting your line of credit to pay off the letter of credit. And that letter of credit is actually cash in the bank in case you default on the money, and then somebody can get it within 24 hours notice. So banks really don't like having their money tied up that way, honestly, but it's very problematic for the smaller providers. So with this program, we said, listen, we need some alternative to this letter of credit because a lot of small providers couldn't do it. Right. So we were able to get energized stakeholders to say, listen, there needs to be an options, allow surety bonds or performance bonds relative to this program as an alternative to just having this cash in the bank. So after this whole effort relative to try to get NTIA to agree to a waiver, they ultimately did. We had to pull together a big group of stakeholders. Almost 300 people signed this letter that went to NTIA. And at the 60 days later, which is basically lightning speed after we send into this letter, a lot of, tremendous people participated on this. NTIA agreed to a programmatic waiver and allowed surety bonds and various flavors.
Oh, so part of your effort was to serve small ISPs who might be interested in pursuing these grants, correct?
That is correct.
Now, Larry, did this come on the radar screen for NASBP?
Funny you should ask that.
Okay.
This goes back to 2017, actually. We heard from a small internet service provider at that time who was actually bidding on the FCC's RDOF program. And at that time, of course, the only form of security was a letter of credit. That small business ISP didn't have sufficient capital in its business and actually couldn't qualify for a letter of credit. In turn, that small ISP went to the SBA Office of Surety Guarantees, seeking potentially a bond to actually replicate a letter of credit. SBA at that time said, we don't have such a product. Go see the NASBP and the surety guys. So that's how we became involved in this process. And actually, shortly thereafter, I raised this issue on Capitol Hill to the House Small Business Committee. And at that time, Steve Shabbat chaired the committee. And he put together an actual hearing on this subject matter. And the small business ISP testified before Steve Shabbat's committee, raising the importance of actually an alternative to letters of credit to allow small ISPs to participate in these auctions. So that's how we became involved in this. Fast forward to Phil's point, I actually became involved with the Letter of Credit Coalition that Phil was involved with back in, I think it was the summer of 2023. And actually, I was invited to participate on a call. Folks wanted to understand and learn about suretyship. And I was sort of the educator, I guess, on the call about surety bonding. And that's how we became involved, dating back to 2017. And then following up finally 6 years later to 2023. It's been a long, strange trip.
Well,
to quote Jerry Garcia.
But this sounds like an area that, frankly, ISP community, broadband offices, just the industry in general, is really not familiar with the surety product.
Yeah.
Would you say that's correct, Cory?
Yeah, I would say that's correct. I mean, there's been, especially for smaller ISPs, just limited bond experience. They have occasional pole attachment bonds or maybe some sort of compliance bond, but historically they don't have big surety programs outside of the larger, national internet service providers. That they have the big bond programs, but those smaller ISPs, the regional or state ISPs, they're just not familiar with bonds and the process that goes into it.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure there's a really strong need for them to prepare to understand what surety is, a lot of education that needs to happen, and then for them to take the steps along the way to get them in the right position. Is that something you've experienced, Joe, in terms of the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to Cory's point, they don't have much experience with these kind of financial vehicles in general. And so much less knowing that it was an option that could sort of bridge the gap to accessing this funding. So, educating the smaller and more rural ISPs on the subject, first of all, that it's even available to them as recourse. Right. And secondly, what's involved. And again, a lot of them aren't necessarily prepared with the robust financials at the ready, to go through the underwriting process. So that's kind of a bit of a shock. But at the same time, it's helpful because it mirrors, as a point that Cory made earlier, mirrors the process that the states are going through, right? And pre-qualification and so forth. So yeah, it's very, very much present. A lot of education is required, but it's a huge opportunity at the same time.
And this is a complex program, right? So it's a federal program, but it's flowing down to states. And there are a lot of expectations, right, for companies that want to participate. Maybe Joe, tell us a little bit more about that kind of complexity. And then, is every state going to treat this the same?
Yeah, sure. So this is what we refer to as a formula grant, right? So each state and territory, all 56, were given an amount of money based on a formula that the NTIA created for, essentially based on their need, right? The number of unserved and underserved locations. To answer your question, yeah, so there's the main program NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, but each state and territory runs their own version of it with their own requirements. Some states are less stringent than others. Some states are running pre-qualifications. Other states are running more just a pre-registration. So it could be as simple as almost like a letter of intent, whereas others are requiring that you provide audited financials in the pre-qualification. So short answer to that question is no, it's not all the same. It's not peanut butter, unfortunately, but it's complex for sure.
So these folks are going to need help.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of doing that. A lot of help.
A lot of
Yeah. Good people to guide them.
That's right.
So from a underwriting standpoint, how should a surety be looking at a potential ISP who wants to pursue this work? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would want to have conversations as early as possible in this process, because they're needing to provide commitment letters, good guy letters, however you want to call it. They all look different state to state, but they have to shore up some capacity while they're applying. And so these conversations need to be happening ahead of time about what we're going to be looking for from a financial perspective, from a work experience perspective. A lot of these companies are pursuing work that's just significantly larger than they've historically done. And so we want to know that they're capable of completing this work and also completing it on time, because there's milestones, there's a time limit here. You have to have the work done within 4 years. Some states and ISPs may want to have it done between 2 or 3, but we've seen in the past with RDOF that some of these ISPs were having challenges hitting milestones, and which was leading to defaults on the work. And there's clawback provisions here. And so the states and the NTIA can claw back the BEAD funds if they are not meeting this time limit and not doing the work.
Wow. Okay. So what is the industry doing to kind of get the word out? I mean, how are we connecting these ISPs to the idea they need to speak with a producer or somebody knowledgeable about performance security? Larry, what kind of outreach has been made?
Well, shortly after the NTIA issued their waiver in November of 2023, NASBP formed a task force, which included the carriers as well as the producers. From there, we actually crafted a BEAD bond kit. Well, first of all, we met with NTIA to show our ability to become a resource and serve as a resource to the agency. Shortly thereafter, a group of, I guess it was a subcommittee group, of producers and underwriters created what is known as the BEAD bond kit. It includes 2 performance bonds, whether it's a single obligee or dual obligee agreement, a model contract agreement, as well as a good guy letter, to Joe's point.
Right.
Once the BEAD bond kit was completed, we reached out to every state broadband office as well as to NTIA to show, hey, the kit is available. Please let us know if you have any questions. We want to be the subject matter resource expert. So we continue to reach out to NTIA throughout the summer and into the fall. And once again, we want to be the sort of the shall answer man here on this particular issue.
Right. I'm sure, I mean, to a certain extent, there's this vacuum, so they need that guidance. And I know we're not saying everybody has to use that, but it serves as examples of approaches that would be acceptable to the surety industry, right?
Exactly. It's a sample. We know that states, and I follow state legislation. I know all state laws are different. There's no uniformity, but it's a sample of a sample resource that the industry actually created and supports.
So, Phil, what kind of flexibility is built into the program for these states? I mean, we talked about it's not all going to look the same, but what kind of opportunity does the state have with respect to their security arrangements that they make for an award?
Well, for the states, typically they'll abide by whatever NTIA requires, and if to the extent they allow the programmatic waiver, they would allow the options under the waiver. Some states may be more rigorous and not allow all the options under the waiver, which is perplexing. But if folks, aren't happy with that, they should be filing an objection, seeking a waiver of the waiver of them, the NTIA not approving the waiver,
right?
Because that's their waiver actually said, it's 100% of the grant award, and then it could ratchet down if you hit milestones going from 100 to 20 to 80 to 20 to 40% over the years. Okay. And then they had this one option, which was just 10% of the grant award, so long as you're seeking reimbursement for no more than 6 months at a time. So that was really appealing to some of the smaller providers, and some states may not recognize that. So to the extent they're not recognizing it, that's when you have to raise an objection and say, this is what you want. So there is some flexibility. Each state is a little bit different. They host a different program based upon the unserved and underserved locations in their state and how they want to do it. On the East Coast, you have fewer unserved or underserved locations because, there's been a lot of deployment that's been going on over the years. But, the middle of the country, you're going to have huge, vast swaths of areas that are unserved and underserved. And these are huge projects.
So I know it's kind of like in early stages in terms of some states are ahead of the game, so to speak, and some are coming up, but they're a little lagging. Are there any states currently right now that have a more defined program that they've put out there?
Well, NTIA itself approved 3 states right before the inauguration. That included Louisiana, Nevada, and Delaware. Okay. And so NTIA approved those programs, but when they did that, they jumped the gun because they should have had NIST, which is a separate agency, which does approve the award grants. And so they have to work in parallel, but they didn't in that case. They thought NIST was going to do the approvals before the inauguration. That approval from NIST was never received. And so as a result, these NTIA approved awards are still in limbo. They didn't get, the money is not flowing just yet, even though the provisional awards are saying, hey, we're ready to go, but they're not ready to go. So those states are far ahead than everybody else. You have a lot of other states that have already opened up the application process, have identified who the people are, the companies are that they're going to award these bids to. And again, it's an RFP process, right? It's these people submit proposals. They look at the best application for the particular area, and they identify those people. You won't know them until the final NTIA approval process is submitted by the state to NTIA, and then they'll put it out for public comment on what they're planning to do.
Oh, that's interesting. What you're saying, Phil, and maybe Joe, maybe follow up. So there's a list, or in some instances of, companies that are pre-approved. Yeah. Now, is that something that a bond producer could use in an effort to, outreach to those companies, letting them know about their opportunity to maybe consider a performance bond rather than a letter of credit?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. So so a lot of the states that have the pre-registration or pre-qualification portions of their application process will publish the list of pre-qualified applicants. So it just means they're cleared to participate. So as a producer, and I'll tell you, I mean, I myself use these lists as a consultant to go, see if they need our help, right?
Right.
So yes, they would. In my mind, it makes a great hunting list. If you're gonna smile and dial and get after these guys. So it's absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
Well, that's great.
This just, take a look at like South Carolina. They have their pre-approved list. Connecticut has its pre-approved list, and other states as well.
All right.
So they
So
just post it on the
We're
website.
saying lists, but actually, where do they go? Is it to the website of the state broadband office? Where might they find those lists? So, for example, South Carolina.
South Carolina, you type in on your web browser, South Carolina broadband office, should open it up, look for where they have the BEAD program, and navigate under the BEAD program until you see the pre-qualified list of the announcements. And once you click that, you'll see a list of, I don't know, maybe 20 or so ISPs that actually are pre-qualified. 20 or
Like
30.
it's that easy.
Yeah,
You know,
you
that's
have the names,
nice.
but now you have to figure out who to do the outreach to.
Yeah.
But you could also contact the broadband office and let them know that you're working with them. Maybe they can give you some intel on who to reach out to on that.
All right. So let's assume, a state is there. They've decided that they are, they're going to adhere to that waiver. They're going to allow bonds as part of the equation for security. Cory, in your mind, what would be the perfect scenario on how they should use surety bonds or performance bonds? And for example, so let's say it's 100% performance bond. I think maybe you had mentioned about, we need to be sensitive that these companies are not overreaching in their appetite. Or are there things that the industry can do or producers can do? And then also, does it lessen the risk, for example, if there's a subcontractor performing work and you bond back that entity? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, having a contractor bond back definitely mitigates some of the risk. And there's a few other, ways and avenues to mitigate some risk. Utilizing some state funds, if that's available, depending on the state, that help cover the match requirements. And I guess I'll go back to your question about the preferred, best case scenario. Having a 10% bond is obviously great for the ISPs because it gives them better options for securing capacity. Mm-hmm. And it does limit from a carrier perspective, having a bond amount that's reduced, but you still want to underwrite and make sure that they're going to, perform the full contract, right?
Right.
And that dollar size is not going to change just because the bond amount is different.
Right.
So having the contractors bond back helps a lot. I mentioned meeting with the ISPs just to understand how they operate and everything. If they have understanding how they're going to, fund the work itself, are they going to be tapping into some capital, outside capital, debt, making sure they know how to manage that correctly, making sure that they have shown a history of refinancing that. There's a lot of different risks that are involved. Expanding into new geographic territories is another one that is something that you want to kind of understand why they're doing that, because they may not have the existing infrastructure there or the relationships there. And so just having those conversations early enough so you can have all the information you need from a carrier perspective to make sure it's something that's worth, supporting or not.
Might there be other bond opportunities from the standpoint, for example, we're all very concerned about inflation, tariffs, the rise in cost of supplies and materials. So if they're asking for, pre-purchase of, materials, could a supply bond be part of the equation?
Potentially. We haven't had any of those conversations or have seen them, but I don't think you could rule out that. These companies do have various other bond needs. I mentioned pole attachment bonds.
Right.
You could have some, license or compliance bonds that they may need, right-of-way bonds that they may need. Depending on the size of them, you could have some sort of financial guarantee obligations that could, be there. And so there are other bond needs. It just is going to vary depending on the size of the company
Right.
and also where they operate in.
Yeah.
Right.
So a great opportunity for a producer to be of service in a lot of regards.
Right.
Right.
Being able to advise them of some additional opportunities
Right.
and needs there.
Yeah, but the critical portion here is the amount of the grant, okay, the funding that the government gives. That's what the bond, at least for NTIA under the BEAD program, that's what they're going to want.
Right.
Okay. These other flavors, that's fine. That might be for something else, but for this purposes of this program, it's the grant fund. So whatever it is, if you're going to get 10 million in grant funds, they expect a 10 million bond. If you're able to get it down to 10%, they're going to do a 1 million bond. You have to keep that until you do the full completion of the project.
That's been great, you guys. I feel like I've learned a lot about BEAD, where it started, how we got where we are, and where we're going. I want to thank all of you for being on with us today. Hopefully we can get you back again sometime when we've written a lot of BEAD bonds.
Excellent. Sounds great. Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.
Before we go, we just wanted to thank EMC Bond again for their generous support in sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety. EMC Bond prioritizes personalized service in every aspect of their business. When you partner with them, you'll receive stable, responsive, and timely solutions rooted in strong relationships. To learn more about EMC Bond, their products, services, and personalized approach, visit emcinsurance.com/bond.